Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host for this week, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is alongside me, and we are in association with NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, you can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link for that is in the podcast description box below. For this week's podcast, we're going to take a look at the Liverpool midfield. It's obviously still a small sample size, just a few games into the Arne Slot era, but I think it's fair to say, Tom, that that's probably one of the areas that has changed the most from Jurgen Klopp into this new era at Anfield. What have you made so far, just in general, really, of Arne Slot's Liverpool? Before we talk about the midfield, it's obviously been 5 games, the one blot on the copybook really for Liverpool, but what have you made of it so far under Arne Slot?
I've been really impressed. I think obviously it's a slightly different setup to what we came to expect under Jurgen Klopp. It was very workmanlike and quite rigid in the sense. Obviously he had that defensive midfielder and then sort of 2 runners really, didn't he? Who were trying to tie everything together from defence to attack. I think under Slot, it does seem to be a little bit more fluid, and I've been really impressed with obviously the work they've been doing on the training field. I'd imagine with Ryan Gravenberch at the base of that midfield. He just seems to be getting better with every game, really. And, I like to see kind of Dominik Szoboszlai kind of showing, signs of the talent that we know is there as well. Obviously, he showed a points last season as well, but I've been really impressed with him, certainly against AC Milan there. And yeah, Alexis McAllister, as we know as well, an excellent footballer. I think he could probably do a job in all of them roles, to be fair to him. But yeah, I've been impressed with what Slot's been able to do over the course of 5 games. It's obviously quite rare that a manager can make an impact that quick on a setup, particularly when there's been a manager in place for 9 years, as it was with Klopp. But yeah, I've been really impressed with the impact that he's made, I'd say, so far.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the midfield. As I mentioned before, it's obviously the biggest change that we've seen, really, in terms of the way that Liverpool set up. There's other things as well. It's been interesting, to me at least, that a few of the players have talked about sort of big changes. Arne Slot's very much been on the side of, it's only a slight tweak in terms of what came before. So the truth is probably somewhere in between those 2 things. But I think it was interesting that Dominik Szoboszlai, I think it was, described it as a number 6, a number 8 and a number 10 in that midfield. Again, it's not massively different to what it was under Jurgen Klopp. But I think, as you said there, it sort of makes a lot of sense with the players that Liverpool have got. I think Dominik Szoboszlai is very much a number 10 who fits that. We're going to go through each of those players and some of the others that Liverpool have got in reserve as well. But I suppose that's probably the best place to start, isn't it? The fact that it is a 6, an 8 and a 10, you look at the players that Liverpool have got in their squad, that probably makes the most sense, really, in terms of how you set those up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems quite pragmatic from the manager, actually. I know that was kind of a system of Feyenoord as well. But yeah, I'd like to say Szoboszlai, I think, is really suited to that sort of more advanced position, sort of the number 10. And then obviously McAllister, I think, can do a job wherever really in that midfield. But the number 8, I think, really suits him as well. And yeah, Gravenberch, as he proved last night, and he has done throughout this season, really, he seems quite settled, I think, in that number 6 position. And I think what Slot's been able to do is bring out them attributes in players there. I think last season there was a couple, not teething problems, but they were getting used to kind of maybe the pace of the Premier League and sort of the 3 games a week and that sort of thing. Some of the players that we brought in. But yeah, it just seems a lot more settled all of a sudden. I think that midfield, that the structure that he's been able to bring in place. And yeah, like to say, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing the likes of Harvey Elliott as well, maybe more advanced, and I think that would really suit him, for example. And yeah, even further forward, I mean, Cody Gakpo's been put on that left-hand side in the attack, and obviously Klopp used him last season, didn't he, in sort of a midfield position, so we might see that again as well. And Curtis Jones obviously came off the bench as well against Forest, and I could see him maybe being able to do any of them jobs in that midfield that you mentioned as well. So, yeah, I think Slot has kind of looked at the squad he's got he's been quite pragmatic, I think, with his options. And, you know, I think that's a good sign from the manager. I'm quite impressed with how he's kind of assessed everything. And, you know, it's paid dividends, really, you know, with the results that we've had. Obviously, other than the blip at the weekend, I think the results have been fantastic. So, yeah, I'm quite impressed with that side of it as well.
I think it's probably fair to say that Ryan Gravenberch is the one that's improved the most. I think he's been the biggest surprise, really. That was obviously a position that Liverpool tried to buy in the summer with Martin Zubimendi, but that didn't happen for obvious reasons. But I suppose the question really with him is just about sample size, isn't it? I think even against Nottingham Forest, he was probably one of the few that came out of that one with a little bit of credit. It wasn't a perfect performance, but there wasn't a great deal of movement in front of him. So there's maybe not so much that he could do about that from his deeper position. But I suppose the question really, the only one left is this a long-term solution for Liverpool to play him there? I think from what I've seen of him, I wrote a piece on this last night after the Milan game, there is a mounting amount of evidence, isn't there now? If you can go to Old Trafford and you can do that, what he did, I think that was his best performance by a distance. He was excellent in that game. Obviously now AC Milan, okay, it's not the AC Milan of 15, 20 years ago, but it's still an intense atmosphere. It's away from home in Europe. It's still a really impressive performance to play as well as he did. And I thought him, Cody Gakpo as well, but I think probably those two were the standouts for Liverpool in the Champions League. So have you seen enough of him yet? Is 5 games enough to think that this could be sustainable for him throughout a full season? Or are you still waiting for a little bit more of that evidence to come in before we're concrete in these judgments?
I think obviously it's early days with him and he's still a young player, I think, kind of finding his feet. And I think it'll kind of become clear, I think, once we start with that rhythm of games. And I think that Virgil van Dijk touched upon that after the Forest game. That might really help us in some ways, I think, to kind of, find what the weaknesses are in the squad and the strengths as well. So yeah, that rhythm's going to be really telling, I think, with Gravenberch. But the early signs are really positive. And obviously when you look at the market now, it seems like that position, it does seem quite inflated in terms of the fees that are going around. And obviously Liverpool have tried to look for value in the market under FSG. So Wataru Endo, came in last summer for a bit of a cut price fee relatively. And, he's been able to do a job. He might be the backup this season in that position. But yeah, I think he's got all the attributes, to be honest, Gravenberch, from what I've seen. I love his composure on the ball. And he's also able to sort of stick the boot in as well. And, there was a moment in the second half, I could see Virgil van Dijk was delighted with him. It was a kind of a last-ditch lunge, really, wasn't it? There was an attack on, and I think he did really well there, tracking his runner as well. I think Canate had lost his man, and he was able to get in there and obviously stop the chance for Milan. So it's stuff like that kind of proves to me that, he's got what it takes, I think, in terms of the defensive side of the game. And I've seen against Forest as well, sort of, he's able to, a bit like Fabinho was able to, sort of in his pomp, move forward with the ball as well and end up in positions where you might not predict that he, pop up there, but it's a bit of an asset as well to the attack. And that's obviously something that Rodri does at Man City as well. So I do think we've got a bit of a gem there. And I think, it's interesting with Gravenberch that 3 or 4 years ago, he was comfortably seen as one of the standout talents in Europe, wasn't he? And I think he's beginning to show. Obviously, he went to Bayern and it was difficult for him, but, he's showing that talent in abundance at the moment. And, I really hope that he is the solution in that position, not just financially, but I think for him as well, because, he looks a great player and I'd love to see him kind of flourish in a Liverpool shirt. So, yeah, I'm hoping that, off the evidence that we've seen, that he could be the solution and it might save us, 100 million quid in the process as well.
Yeah, you always get those sliding doors moments. You think of a couple of players that Jurgen Klopp tried to buy and ends up with somebody else, probably Julian Brandt and Mohamed Salah is the obvious one, but it feels like that could be the first of those for Arne Slot, really. Obviously, I mentioned Zubimendi before. If it does become Ryan Gravenberch for the future, then that's no bad thing for Liverpool. But I wanted to pick up as well on something you said there about those breaks forward. We saw that against Manchester United in particular, I thought, where he snaps into a tackle and really drives forward. But I think it's Alexis Mac Allister that really allows him to do that. I was a much bigger fan than most people, I think, of Mac Allister in that 6th position last season for Liverpool. I think he was probably Liverpool's best player for large periods of last season, and obviously doing it at a position that he's not 100% suited or possibly would prefer to play a little bit further forward. But I think when you've got those two together, again, Arne Slot's been very, very clear that it's not a 4-2-3-1, it's a 4-3-3. But if you've got both of those players who can drop into that number 6 position, if Gravenberch goes, Mac Allister can stay. There's been times when, we've seen that relationship maybe with Trent and Szoboszlai as well. If Trent goes, Szoboszlai can go in and fill in at right back. There's obviously a 6, an 8 and a 10 within that midfield, but there's also a bit of rotation between those players. And I really, really like that sort of relationship that we've seen with Mac Allister and Gravenberch so far.
Yeah, I mean, that fluidity really stood out to me, particularly in the Forest game as well. Obviously, we didn't get the result that we would have wanted, but I could see that even the example that you said there about Trent, when he went into midfield, and obviously Conor Bradley was behind him at right back, there was a bit of interchange there as well in terms of position. So there does seem to be that flexibility in the structure of the team, which, is quite different to how Klopp kind of used to do it. But, I think it's a positive, and, we're using what we've got in the squad. And like to say there, Mac Allister, I think, he's someone who I think his quality shines through whatever position he plays. That experience that he's got, obviously playing, in the Premier League for Brighton, he's come to Liverpool and obviously with Argentina as well. I just think his quality is above kind of most players he's going to come up against in midfield. And even when he's slotting into that number 6 position, again, the Forest game, I thought we were at our best for that first hour when he was on the pitch. He was often dropping into that number 6 position, wasn't he? And getting the ball either off the defence or the keeper. So yeah, I love that side of his game as well, that he's really comfortable on the ball. And like to say, last season, I thought he gave a good account of himself in that position. And that could be an option moving forward. Obviously, if there are injuries, hopefully there's not. But, with 3 games a week, you do encounter kind of fitness issues and stuff. So there might be a situation where Mac Allister drops into that number 6 again. And I don't think that would be a bad thing as well. I think that we've got the options in the squad, to kind of facilitate that as well. So yeah, I think we've got all kinds of options, and I like that there's that flexibility within games as well now, where you can see it with your own eyes, can't you? Players are allowed to kind of move into different positions, and other people can cover for them and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's been interesting seeing how that's developed, and I think that's probably the key example with Gravenberch and Mac Allister, kind of seeing that in fruition a little bit.
Yeah, Dominik Szoboszlai as well, obviously alongside them, has been pretty good, I think, at the start of this season. I think that the big question really for him was his energy levels seemed to wane in the second half of last season. He, like many others, was really poor against Nottingham Forest. But then Arne Slot on Monday said he wanted him to score more goals, and he managed to do that against AC Milan. So is that the big question, do you think, in terms of Szoboszlai? If he's going to play in that number 10 position, he needs to get a few more goals and assists. I think, was it 3 or 4 goals that he got last season? A couple of long-range efforts that obviously fly into the top corner, but you almost want him to be a little bit more of a flat-track bully at certain times. If he can just build up those numbers, he seems to me as well to be a player that I think you could see this against Milan as well, where he finds the back of the net and he can instantly get a confidence boost. His energy levels go up. He seems to thrive when he's sort of on top of his game and playing well. So is that the next step, do you think, really, for him? He's obviously done pretty well at Liverpool so far, but maybe just 1 or 2 more goals might take him to that next level.
Yeah, I think obviously he showed that talent last season, and I think it was in fits and bursts a little bit. But yeah, that consistency, I think, is what we need from him now. Obviously, he's 23 years of age, so, he's still a young player, and I can tell he's kind of still finding his feet a little bit, but I think Slot was right that, the numbers have got to improve in terms of his output, obviously goals and assists, and particularly when he's going to be playing this more advanced position, you'd expect hopefully that he'll be arriving in the box a bit more and, being able to get on the end of chances. And I was really happy for him last night. Obviously, it was a great run for him, Cody Gakpo, and he was in the right position to get on the end of it. And I think that's what we want to see more now from him. He's obviously got them capabilities. And like I say, I think he is a player who thrives on confidence. And we did see that last season as well, that, when he's at his best, I think, he showed signs of being a real, top midfielder who, there's not many midfielders with an eye for goal as well. So, I think he's a real asset for Slot to have. And I can tell that's why he's backing him in that position as well. So it was kind of not constructive criticism, a bit of tough love maybe in the press conference when he said it, that, he's hoping that he can kind of add that to his game now. And, the system's kind of set up for him to do that, I think, a little bit as well. So hopefully, we're seeing them improvements game on game. There was a little setback with Forest, but, I'd like to think that over the course of the season, he could end up on 10 goals, say, from midfield, which, people have said for years whether there should be, more midfielders kind of chipping in with goals and stuff. And I remember Klopp saying, well, basically the midfield facilitate our attack to go and score 20, 30 goals a season each, which I can understand what he was saying. But with this kind of new system, I think we could actually improve on what was there under Klopp in a sense, and sort of make the most of the options we've got now. And yeah, it seems to suit Szoboszlai really well, that more advanced position. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, I think, over the course of the season.
I think for me that there's a bit of a question mark in terms of coming up against a low block with Szoboszlai. I think but the Forest game, obviously, as I mentioned, was difficult really for a number of players all across the board. It was strange to see really all of the front 5 or 6 players and the fullbacks as well really struggling to break Forest down. But I do wonder if there's a little bit of a question mark over him in terms of that. I think he's maybe more suited when there's a bit more space. Think of Ipswich, even Brentford were obviously a bit more expansive than Forest, and the bigger games, United and AC Milan, there's a bit of an emphasis on those teams to come out and play a little bit more. I think that there's maybe a little bit of a question mark if a team does sit back and you've got to break them down. Does he have the guile or that kind of, just that little spark in that final third rather than having the space to run into, or the opposition having the ball and him being able to press and win the ball back in that sense? I think there's possibly a little bit of a question mark over that. But then I suppose Arne Slot would say, well, there's Harvey Elliott. He's obviously injured at the moment, but maybe Harvey Elliott is the solution when that's the case. It feels like really unfortunate timing, I think, with Elliott. He would have got a lot of minutes having been out of the team at the start of this season. It will put more pressure on Szoboszlai to perform, of course, but it's really frustrating, I think. It's fair to say, for Elliott to pick up the injury at this moment in time. I think he and Liverpool will suffer as a result of that. How big a problem is it, do you think, for Liverpool in the next few weeks that Harvey Elliott isn't going to be available?
Yeah, just in terms of rotation, I think first and foremost that, the manager showed already that he does like to rotate his team, and he is another body, and he's a player, like you say. I think that he can maybe unlock a defence a little bit more, and he's maybe got that eye for a pass, I think, in the final third. He's a bit of a difference maker in that respect, I'd say, Harvey Elliott. So I think we have missed that a little bit, and there were certainly games last season where, Klopp used Harvey Elliott an awful lot, didn't he, in games, particularly off the bench as well, when maybe we were needing a goal or just to get control back on the game. So, yeah, I think we've missed him, certainly. And I could see in the Forest game, for example, when there was that low block where a team doesn't necessarily want the ball, you kind of want your midfielders to be able to pick that pass and maybe create something out of nothing. And yeah, maybe that was the little sort of negative to Szoboszlai's game that was kind of exposed in that match. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that we can soldier on, I'd say, with the options that we've got. But yeah, I think he's been a bit of a loss, to be honest, in the first 5 games that we played this season. I would have liked to have seen him, I think, from the start of the campaign, really, because I do think he's going to play a big part on the Slot. I think he's kind of ready-made and perfect for that role. And, I think he's built up the minutes over the last couple of seasons as well that suggest that, that this could be, a real breakout season for him. I think, he had a lot of game time last season, but I think this could be one where he's really impacting games on a regular basis. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him come back, to be honest, because I think he can make an impact.
Yeah, he's another one of those players that you just think he can get another 5 or 6 goals and then suddenly people will look at him in a completely different way as well. So, yeah, fingers crossed he can come back a little bit sooner than expected. I think that would be a big thing for Liverpool. But again, still very young and still with a lot of potential and a lot of time really on his side to take that next step. But let's talk about the other player who's not played a huge amount because of injury so far this season, Curtis Jones. I think it would be fair to say that he was looking like he needed a few more minutes before coming on against Nottingham Forest. It wasn't the ideal time for him to return from injury and make his first appearance of the season. But he's another one that I think is really well suited to this Liverpool team. I don't think he's quite a number 10 anymore. He certainly was when he was younger. Probably not a number 6, really, in terms of the way that Liverpool want to play. He is, though, I think, perfect for that number 8 position. And, of course, Alexis McAllister, if he's needed in other areas, Liverpool are going to need Curtis Jones to be sharp. So I suppose the only question is in terms of his fitness and his match sharpness, but the only way you get that back is by playing minutes. So how much of an impact do you think Curtis Jones is going to make in the next few weeks? Do you think he's maybe having an eye on that West Ham game? I think a week today maybe is his first start of the season and maybe kicking on from there.
Yeah, it's obviously difficult for players when they're in and out the team, I think, in them early weeks. And obviously there's always that question mark with a new manager of where a player's going to fit in and what best position it is going to be for them in the team. But yeah, it's really interesting with him, like you say, that I think definitely the number 6 position and the number 8 position, as Slot seems to like it to be. I think that Curtis could certainly do a job in both of them positions, and he's another option at the end of the day. And I think when the games are coming thick and fast, obviously you mentioned the West Ham game there. I think that's in the League Cup, is it? So I think that's a perfect option. I think for Slot to kind of experiment a little bit, and it's kind of going back to what Brendan Rodgers said all them years ago. You're trying to build the plane when it's in flight a little bit sometimes, and it's kind of that thing a little bit, I think, where it's like, he's kind of still trying to see with certain players where they should fit in best, I think, in the team. And that will become clear, I think, when there's more games and it's coming thick and fast. So, yeah, the West Ham game, I think he'll have one eye on that, Curtis Jones. And he obviously came off the bench against Forest. And I think it's hard for players to make that kind of impact when, obviously, that's his first appearance in the league this season. And, there was a few of them that looked a bit rusty, as I think they would, obviously, with Slot having a bit of a settled team, really, in them first 4 league games. So, yeah, I think it's going to be good for him to get minutes kind of under his belt. And we know with Curtis Jones, I think the more that he plays, the more comfortable he is, that consistency can come. So, yeah, I think, again, he's another player who's going to be a real asset to the manager. I think that, he can play all 3 positions in a sense, but yeah, I think the number 8 and the number 6, I can certainly see him doing the job there. So yeah, I think there's a lot of games to be played for Curtis this season, for sure.
Yeah, I think the West Ham game is going to be important, not just for him, but for quite a few of the players who've not played so far. I'd imagine we'd probably see Joe Gomez, maybe Jarrell Quansah comes back in for that one. Federico Chiesa as well. Obviously, we saw a couple of minutes of him. I think he only had 1 touch against Milan, but I'm sure that's probably a game that he'll be eyeing up as well for a sustained period of minutes, maybe an hour or so, just as he continues to build his way back. But yeah, certainly for Curtis Jones, and it probably would have been for Harvey Elliott as well had he not been injured. But just to finish off then in terms of the midfield chat, let's talk a little bit about the depth. I think there's still a bit of a question mark in terms of whether Liverpool are one light. Obviously, we've mentioned Zubimendi a couple of times. We don't need to go over that ground again, but it still feels to me as much as Liverpool are in a decent position at the moment that they maybe could have done with one more. There's obviously the January transfer window not that far away that they could look to bring somebody else in. There's a couple of young players as well that are looking to make an impact. How comfortable are you in terms of the overall depth, even though we've not seen all of the players in that position so far this season? We've not necessarily had 2 games a week at this point either. So are you at all concerned in terms of just the pure volume of numbers that Arne Slot's got this season?
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little bit concerned. I think, when you're playing a lot of games, and obviously there's the extra Champions League games from this season onwards, I think that there has to be that concern a little bit. If there are a couple of injuries, particularly in them key positions that we've highlighted, in midfield, I would be a little bit worried, I'd say, with the options that we've got. I think every player that we've got right now is very much capable of coming in. So I've got no doubts in terms of quality of the options we've already got. But yet maybe another body wouldn't have gone amiss, I think, in the summer. I'd say in the number 6 position, the saving grace is that, McAllister can drop in there. And obviously we've got Wataru Endo as well, who we know we can do a stable job in there. Alongside obviously Gravenberch, who's got he's the first choice at the moment. But yeah, I just think maybe another body would have been quite helpful, I think, for the manager. Obviously, we've let Bobby Clark go. Stefan Bajcetic has gone out on loan as well. So yeah, I hope that in a sense we're not made to rue that a little bit, maybe letting one too many go. Obviously, they're young players, but I think particularly Bobby Clark, he did make a bit of an impact last season, I think, particularly in the Cups as well. And yeah, I guess the worry will be that you're stretched a little bit thin. Obviously, if you go deep in one of sort of the cup competitions, the domestic cups, then you'd imagine that Slot's going to be able to, he's going to have to use a squad in that respect. So, yeah, I'm just hoping that, injuries don't come our way and we're made to maybe regret maybe not making, another signing in the summer. But yeah, maybe we can soldier on till January and, get a bit of luck in terms of the injuries. So yeah, possibly a little bit light in a couple of areas, but, I think all's not lost. And I think that the options that we have got are very much capable. And I think we'll be okay in terms of what we've got. It's just that maybe, with the cups and the extra games in the Champions League, it does bring up that question a little bit of whether we've quite got the strength and depth. But again, that's another one that's going to come clear, I think, over the course of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd echo those thoughts really in terms of Bobby Clark and Stefan Bajcetic as well. I think is possibly slightly different in that he's probably not ready. He needs those minutes and it makes sense. Mm-hmm. He probably wouldn't have got the minutes for Liverpool, so it makes sense that he can go out and do that with Salzburg. But yeah, possibly a question mark over whether Liverpool are one short. And obviously the loss of Harvey Elliott unexpectedly probably adds into that as well. But we shall see what happens. I'm sure we'll mention it on the Liverpool.com podcast in the next few weeks as we see what happens. Obviously loads of games in loads of different competitions as well for Liverpool and Arne Slot. But we'll leave it there for this week. Thank you very much to Tom for joining me. Thank you very much for everyone at home for watching and listening too. We'll catch you again next week right here on the Blood Red Show.